The evening air was filled with excitement and a soft hum of piano notes echoing through the old music hall. It was the night of the annual piano recital, an event the entire town looked forward to every year. Students, teachers, and families gathered in their finest clothes, chatting and laughing as they waited for the performances to begin. The air smelled faintly of polished wood, fresh flowers, and nervous energy. Among the crowd near the back row sat a woman dressed simply in a faded beige dress. She was quiet, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her eyes gently scanning the stage. She didn't look like the others. No shiny jewelry, no elegant hairstyle, no air of importance. Just a simple woman who seemed content to blend into the background. She had arrived early, yet no one had noticed her come in. People brushed past her, talking loudly, not bothering to look twice. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another guest, perhaps a mother waiting for her child's turn to perform. Or maybe a relative who didn't really understand much about music, but came out of politeness. She didn't carry herself like a performer, and that was enough for people to overlook her completely. The young students, dressed neatly in suits and gowns, gathered near the stage, whispering among themselves. Some carried sheet music, others practiced quietly on imaginary pianos with their fingers tapping in the air. A few of them noticed the woman, sitting silently, and exchanged curious looks. "She doesn't look like she belongs here," one student murmured softly to another. "Maybe she's someone's aunt," the other replied, shrugging, and they both laughed quietly before turning their attention back to the piano. The lights dimmed slightly as the host stepped on stage, holding a microphone. The chatter faded into silence. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," the host began warmly. "Welcome to our annual piano recital. Tonight you'll witness the talent and hard work of our students who've practiced tirelessly for this moment. And we're especially honored to have with us Maestro Renard, a world-renowned pianist and conductor, to guide and judge our young performers tonight." The audience clapped politely as the maestro, a man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, stood from his front row seat and nodded. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his presence commanding respect without words. As the performances began, the hall filled with the sound of music. Some students played with passion, their fingers moving with impressive speed. Others stumbled nervously, missing notes and glancing anxiously at the maestro for approval. Every applause that followed was polite, sometimes enthusiastic, sometimes hesitant. The simple woman watched each performance closely, her eyes kind, her expression calm. She didn't judge or whisper to the person beside her like many others did. She simply listened, really listened. Halfway through the program, one of the organizers rushed to the host and whispered something urgently in his ear. The host's smile faltered for a second, then he leaned toward the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we seem to have a small change in our program. One of our performers has fallen ill and won't be able to perform tonight." A few disappointed murmurs spread through the audience. The host continued, "If there's anyone among us who would like to fill in, you're welcome to volunteer." A quiet pause followed. No one moved. The young students exchanged glances, whispering, but none of them dared to step forward. And then softly from the back row, a hand lifted into the air. It was the simple woman. The host blinked, unsure if he had seen it right. Yes, miss, would you like to perform?" She nodded slowly, her eyes gentle but steady. A small ripple of surprise spread across the room. The students turned in their seats, whispering again, their faces showing amusement and disbelief. "Is she serious?" one girl muttered. "She doesn't even look like she can play," another said under her breath. "Maybe she'll just press random keys," a boy joked quietly, and a few giggles followed. Even the maestro glanced at her, his brow slightly furrowed. He didn't say a word but exchanged a brief look with the host as if asking silently, "Are we really doing this?" The host, trying to keep the atmosphere light, smiled awkwardly. "Well, that's the spirit," he said. "Please come forward." The woman stood smoothing the wrinkles on her dress and walked slowly toward the stage. Her steps were calm and graceful, but her modest appearance made her seem fragile among the polished wood and grand lighting of the concert hall. When she reached the stage, she gave a small, respectful nod to the maestro and then turned toward the audience. Her face showed no nervousness, only quiet determination. The whispers grew louder now. Some people leaned forward, curious to see what she would do. Others shook their heads, expecting an uncomfortable performance. The woman took a seat at the piano bench, her back straight, her hands hovering gently above the keys. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and then exhaled softly. There was something different about her silence. It wasn't the silence of fear, but of focus. The maestro noticed it too, though he didn't show it. Something in her calmness made him hesitate before passing judgment. The host, standing at the side of the stage, looked uncertain. "Would you like to tell us your name, miss?" he asked gently. The woman smiled faintly. "It's not important," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Let the piano speak instead." A hush fell over the hall. Even the giggling students went quiet. The maestro leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing with sudden curiosity. Her fingers rested on the keys. The first sound she made wasn't a sharp or nervous strike. It was a soft, gentle note, almost like a sigh. The sound drifted through the hall like a calm breeze, but just as the first note began, the host quickly raised his hand. Ma'am, we actually haven't started your turn yet. I'll introduce—" She shook her head politely, still focused on the piano. "Please," she said softly, "let me just play." Her words were simple, but something about the way she said them carried weight. The host nodded and stepped aside. The woman looked down again, and for a brief moment the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. No one coughed, no one whispered. Even the maestro didn't move. She touched the first keys again, her hands trembling slightly at first, then growing steady. She didn't need sheet music. Every note she played seemed to come from memory. Not the memory of a song she practiced, but of a story she had lived. Though the piece was only beginning, there was something strangely familiar about her movements. Her fingers glided naturally, her body swaying gently with the rhythm only she could feel. It wasn't a performance yet. It was more like a private moment, shared quietly with the piano itself. And in the dim light, something subtle changed in the air. The whispers faded completely. The smirk softened. Even the maestro's eyes grew thoughtful. At that moment, it didn't matter who she was or how she looked. The audience could sense it. There was something special about her, something that words couldn't explain. But before anyone could fully understand what was happening, she stopped suddenly, resting her hands back on her lap. The sound of the final note lingered faintly, disappearing into the still air. The host, surprised, leaned forward. "Would you like to continue?" he asked gently. The woman gave a small, polite smile. "I will," she said softly, "when the time is right." Then she stood up quietly, gave a small nod to the maestro, and walked back toward her seat. People turned their heads to watch her, whispering again, but this time with confusion instead of mockery. The maestro watched her closely as she sat back down, still calm, her hands folded again. He said nothing but made a small note on the paper in front of him. To everyone else, she was just a strange woman who had taken a seat at the piano for no reason. But to the maestro, there was something more, something he couldn't quite name yet. The next performer was called on stage, and the recital continued. Laughter and polite applause returned. The audience tried to focus again, but a small trace of unease lingered in the air. Something had shifted. The simple woman in the beige dress had played only a few notes. Yet she had managed to capture everyone's attention, not with skill or showmanship, but with quiet mystery. And though no one could have known it then, that brief, unfinished melody was only the beginning of something unforgettable, something that would soon silence every doubt and leave even the maestro himself completely stunned. After the short, strange moment on stage, the recital continued as if nothing unusual had happened. But those who had seen the woman step up to the piano couldn't completely forget the feeling she left behind. Her few notes had carried something that none of the other performances did, something quiet, yet deeply powerful. As more students took the stage, playing their well-rehearsed pieces, some people in the audience still found themselves glancing at the woman from time to time. She sat quietly in the same seat, her face calm, her hands folded together, her eyes occasionally drifting toward the piano. It was as if she was lost in her own thoughts, unaffected by the chatter and noise around her. The young performers did their best to impress. Some played with energy and speed, others focused on showing technique, and a few stumbled nervously over forgotten notes. The maestro clapped politely after each one, writing his comments neatly on the paper in front of him. But his eyes every now and then would lift toward the woman sitting at the back. Something about her short performance had unsettled him, though he didn't quite understand why. When the final student finished, the host returned to the stage. "Let's give a big round of applause to all our performers tonight," he said brightly. The audience clapped, cheering for their children, friends, and students. But as the applause faded, the host hesitated for a moment. He looked toward the maestro for direction. The maestro gave a small nod. "Before we conclude," the host continued, "we still have one open performance slot. Earlier, a kind lady from the audience volunteered to play but didn't get the full chance to show us her piece." A murmur spread through the crowd. Heads turned once again toward the simple woman. Some students whispered, "Is she really going to play again?" while others rolled their eyes. The woman looked up slowly. Her face showed no fear, only quiet readiness. She stood up gracefully and began walking toward the stage again. This time the hall was quieter than before. There were no giggles or mocking smiles, only curiosity. Even the maestro leaned back in his seat, folding his hands thoughtfully. When she reached the piano, she took a moment to sit down. She didn't rush. She placed her hands on her lap, closed her eyes, and inhaled slowly, as though gathering every piece of herself before beginning. The hall waited. You could almost hear the sound of someone's heartbeat in the silence. Then, without announcement or hesitation, her fingers found the keys. The first sound that came from the piano was soft, like a whisper of wind through trees. It wasn't a piece people recognized. It wasn't one of those famous recital songs that students practiced endlessly. It was something entirely her own. The melody flowed gently, almost like a story being told. The first few notes were calm and patient, as if testing the air. Then came the deeper tones, warm and full, like the sound of distant memories returning after many years. At first, people weren't sure what to make of it. But as she continued, the audience began to feel something stirring inside them. Her music wasn't loud or dramatic, yet it reached places that words couldn't touch. It was the kind of music that made you stop thinking and just feel. The maestro's expression changed. His eyebrows drew together. His hand paused midair with his pen. Every note seemed to strike somewhere deep inside him, a place only true music could reach. He had judged hundreds of performances in his life, but this was different. The woman's hands moved gracefully without showmanship. She wasn't performing for applause or attention. She played as if she was speaking privately to the piano, or maybe to someone who wasn't there anymore. Her music carried sadness, love, longing, and peace all at once. The audience sat frozen. Even the restless children stopped fidgeting. The sound filled every corner of the hall, gentle yet powerful, simple yet full of emotion. There was no sheet music in front of her, no sign of preparation, only feeling. At one point, the melody became more intense, the notes rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks. Her body swayed slightly, her eyes still closed, completely lost in the sound. You could tell this wasn't just music. It was a part of her soul being poured out through every key. And then, as smoothly as it began, the storm of notes softened again. The melody faded into something fragile, almost like a whisper saying goodbye. Her final note lingered in the air, pure and trembling, until it finally disappeared. For a moment, no one moved. The hall was completely silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows a mistake. It was the silence that comes when something beautiful has taken everyone by surprise. The woman opened her eyes slowly, her face calm and peaceful. She didn't look around to see the reaction. She simply lowered her hands from the piano and placed them gently on her lap, as though she had just finished having a long, honest conversation. And then suddenly, someone began clapping. It was hesitant at first, one pair of hands in the middle of the hall. Then another joined, and another. Within seconds, the hall filled with applause so loud it echoed off the walls. The woman looked up, startled. She hadn't expected it. People were standing now, their faces bright with awe. The young students who had laughed earlier were silent, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some of them even clapped with genuine admiration. The maestro was the last to stand. Slowly, with deep respect, he rose to his feet and began to clap too. Not just politely, but sincerely. His sharp eyes, which usually spotted every technical flaw, were softer now. For the first time in a long while, he had been moved not by perfection, but by truth. The host stepped forward again, speechless for a moment. "That was extraordinary," he finally said. "Thank you." The woman gave a small nod, her expression humble, almost shy. She didn't bow dramatically or wave. She simply stood up, gave one final glance toward the piano, and began walking back to her seat. As she passed by the audience, some people smiled at her. Others looked at her as if they had seen something impossible. She returned to her chair and sat quietly again, folding her hands just as before. After the applause died down, the maestro motioned to the host and whispered something to him. The host nodded and turned back to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the maestro would like to meet this performer personally after the recital." There was a small buzz of curiosity in the audience. The students looked impressed, and maybe a little jealous. When the event finally ended, people began to gather their things and talk about the evening. But the conversation wasn't about who won the awards or who made mistakes. Everyone was talking about the simple woman who came out of nowhere and played like a professional, even better than some of the trained musicians. "Who is she?" someone asked near the exit. "No idea," another replied. "Maybe she used to play before." "She didn't even tell her name," a third voice added. "It's strange, but beautiful." Meanwhile, the maestro waited near the stage, his expression thoughtful. When the woman approached him, he smiled faintly and gestured for her to sit beside him. "I have listened to countless pianists," he said quietly, "but few have ever played with such feeling. Where did you learn?" The woman hesitated. She looked down at her hands before answering softly. "I learned a long time ago. Life kept me away from it, but I never forgot." The maestro studied her face for a moment. There was no arrogance, no sign of pride. Only calmness, and in something deeper, something like quiet pain. He nodded slowly. "You played from the heart," he said, "and that cannot be taught." The woman smiled faintly, as if his words meant more to her than applause ever could. "Thank you," she said simply. They talked for a few more minutes, and the maestro offered her a kind invitation to visit his academy whenever she wished. But she didn't give a clear answer, only a soft smile and a gentle, "We'll see." When she left the hall that night, the cold air brushed against her face, carrying faint echoes of the music still ringing inside. She walked down the quiet street alone, her shoes clicking softly against the pavement. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. Behind her, inside the hall, the maestro still sat at the piano, playing the same melody she had performed, trying to capture what she had done, but realizing he couldn't. Her music had come from a place he could not reach through skill alone. And as the lights of the music hall faded behind her, the woman disappeared into the night, simple, unnoticed once again by the world, yet having left behind something unforgettable. The next morning, sunlight poured gently through the curtains of a small apartment on the edge of town. The woman sat by her window, a cup of tea warming her hands. She watched the quiet street below, children walking to school, shopkeepers opening their doors, a stray cat stretching lazily in the sun. Everything looked peaceful, yet her heart still carried the echoes of last night's music. She hadn't expected to play in front of anyone again, especially not after so many years away from the piano. It had started as a simple moment, a chance to fill in for someone who couldn't perform. But it had ended with something far more powerful. For the first time in years, she had felt seen, not for how she looked, but for what her heart carried. She took a slow sip of tea and closed her eyes, remembering the sound of the applause, the way it had filled the room, the surprise in people's faces, the quiet respect in the maestro's eyes. It had been overwhelming, not because she wanted recognition, but because it reminded her of a part of herself she had almost forgotten. Her small apartment was plain, a few old books, a simple table, and a well-kept piano that stood in one corner. It wasn't grand like the one at the recital hall. Its surface was scratched and faded, the keys slightly yellowed from age. But it was hers. Every mark and worn edge carried memories. It was the same piano her father had saved money to buy decades ago, when she was a little girl learning her first notes. She stood and walked toward it, running her fingers lightly over the keys. A faint smile appeared on her face. She pressed one note, then another, and soon a soft melody filled the small room. It was gentle, warm, a piece she had written long ago when dreams still felt possible. For a long time she played alone, lost in her music. The sound filled the space around her like sunlight through an open window. Outside, people passed by without knowing that inside that small apartment, someone was breathing life into forgotten melodies. But her quiet moment didn't last long. A knock on the door startled her. She stopped playing and turned. It was rare for anyone to visit her. Most people in the neighborhood barely knew her name. She opened the door slowly and found a young man standing there, holding an envelope in his hand. He looked polite, slightly nervous. "Good morning, ma'am," he said respectfully. "I've been asked to deliver this to you." She accepted the envelope, confused. "Who sent it?" she asked softly. "The Music Academy," he replied. "From last night's recital." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh," she said, nodding. "Thank you." The man smiled, gave a small bow, and left. She closed the door gently behind her and sat down at the table, staring at the envelope. The academy hadn't sent her anything in years, not since the time she had stopped teaching there quietly after her mother's illness. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a folded letter written on the academy's stationery. The handwriting was elegant and neat. It was from the Maestro. The message was short but sincere. "Your performance last night moved me deeply. True music comes not from the fingers but from the heart, and you reminded everyone of that truth. I would be honored if you would return to the academy and play again at our upcoming charity event. The stage is waiting for you." At the bottom was his signature and a small note. "Please call the academy if you wish to accept." The woman read the letter twice. Her heart caught between surprise and hesitation. She hadn't stepped into that academy for years. The memories were both sweet and painful. Years of teaching, guiding students, and then slowly disappearing from that world when life demanded her attention elsewhere. She folded the letter carefully and looked out the window again. For a moment she thought of ignoring it, telling herself that her time had passed. But then she remembered the faces from last night, the look of wonder, the feeling of connection, the silence that had followed her last note. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. That evening she walked to the academy. The same halls she had once known were filled with laughter, footsteps, and the faint sound of instruments being practiced in different rooms. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. A young receptionist looked up as she entered. "Good evening," the girl said warmly. "Can I help you?" The woman held out the letter. "I was asked to come," she said quietly. The girl's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you're the performer from last night," she said, almost excited. "Everyone's been talking about you. The maestro said you might come." The woman smiled faintly, embarrassed by the attention. "Is he here?" "Yes, he's waiting in the rehearsal room," the girl replied, pointing down the hall. As the woman walked through the familiar corridor, she could almost hear echoes of her younger self, laughing with students, giving lessons, correcting small mistakes. She had loved this place once. When she reached the rehearsal room, the door was open slightly. The maestro was sitting at the piano, playing a slow, thoughtful tune. His back was straight, his posture perfect, but his face showed the lines of age and experience. He looked up as she entered and smiled. "I was hoping you would come," he said gently. She nodded. "Your letter was kind," she said, "but I wasn't sure I should." "Why not?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "It's been a long time. I'm not the same person I was. I stopped playing publicly years ago." He leaned back slightly. "And yet, you played last night better than anyone I've seen in years." That wasn't luck or habit, that was honesty. People felt something real. She looked down at her hands. "I didn't plan to play that way," she said quietly. "I just felt something I hadn't felt in a long time." "That's exactly what true music is," he said. "It comes when you stop trying to impress and start trying to feel." He stood and gestured toward the piano. "Play something for me again," he said kindly. "Not for the audience, but for yourself." She hesitated for a moment, then sat down. Her fingers touched the keys like greeting an old friend. She began to play a soft piece, not the one from last night, but something new. It was delicate, like a sunrise slowly breaking through fog. The maestro listened in silence, his eyes closing. When she finished, he opened them again and smiled faintly. "That," he said, "is what the world needs to hear." She gave a small laugh. "You make it sound easy," she said. "It isn't," he replied. "But when something is meant for you, it finds its way back, no matter how long it's been." For a long time, neither spoke. The quiet between them was comfortable. Finally, he said, "The charity event is next month. It's not just about music, and it's about hope. People will come from everywhere. I want you to be part of it. No pressure, no competition. Just you, the piano, and the truth in your heart." She thought about it for a while. Then slowly she nodded. "All right," she said softly. I'll do it. The maestro smiled, relieved. Good, he said. You'll remind everyone that the beauty of music doesn't come from fame or age. It comes from soul. As she left the academy that night, the street outside glowed softly under the streetlights. She walked slowly, her steps light, her heart calm. For the first time in many years, she felt purpose again. When she reached home, she sat by her piano once more, opened her old notebook, and began writing down pieces she hadn't finished long ago. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrote, but there was joy in that trembling, the joy of rediscovering something that never truly left. The city outside was quiet. Through the window, the moonlight touched her piano keys like silver. She smiled, placed her hands on the piano again, and began to play, softly, gently, with all the emotion her heart could carry. Each note she played that night felt like a promise, not just to the audience who had heard her, not just to the maestro who believed in her, but to herself, a promise that it's never too late to begin again. And though she sat there alone, the room didn't feel empty. The air around her seemed alive, filled with the spirit of her music, with memories and dreams, and with the quiet truth that sometimes life gives you a second chance exactly when you least expect it. Days passed quietly after her visit to the academy, yet something inside her had changed. The world outside looked the same streets, the same sounds, the same daily routines, but inside, she felt a small flame that had come back to life. Each morning after breakfast, she sat at her piano and practiced, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because the music itself made her feel alive again. Her fingers, though a little stiff from years of rest, slowly regained their flow. She would lose track of time while playing, her heart and hands moving as one. Sometimes she smiled to herself, remembering melodies she'd written long ago, but never shared with anyone. Other times, she'd close her eyes and let her feelings guide her through the notes. The piano once again became her friend, her quiet companion that listened without judgment. The upcoming charity event was a month away, and though she had agreed to perform, a small voice in her heart whispered doubts. She hadn't been on a public stage in years. What if her nerves betrayed her? What if she wasn't as good as she used to be? One afternoon, while she was practicing, a knock came at her door. She paused, expecting it to be the mailman or a neighbor. But when she opened the door, she found the maestro standing there, holding a small stack of sheet music in his hand. He smiled warmly. "I was in the neighborhood," he said casually, though his eyes carried purpose. "I thought I might check on your progress." She smiled, surprised but pleased. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Maybe not," he said with a gentle shrug. "But I had a feeling you'd be here and playing as always." He stepped inside, looking around her small home. His eyes rested on the old piano in the corner. "So this is where it all happens," he said softly. She nodded. "It's not much, but it's enough." The maestro walked closer, touching the piano's surface gently. "It's beautiful," he said. "You can feel the history in it. You've played on this one for many years, haven't you?" She smiled faintly. "Since I was a child, my father worked 2 jobs to buy it for me. He said it was my doorway to dreams." The maestro's expression softened. "Then it's no wonder your music feels alive. It's built from love, not luxury." He sat beside her at the piano bench and handed her the sheet music. "These are some classic pieces for the charity event," he said. "But I want you to decide if you'll play one of these or something of your own." She looked at the pages in her hands, well-known pieces that every trained pianist admired. They were beautiful, but she felt no connection to them. She looked back up at him. "Would it be all right if I played something original?" she asked carefully. The maestro's eyes lit up. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. "Play me something now if you don't mind." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right," she said softly. Her fingers touched the keys and a slow melody began to bloom. It was gentle at first, like sunlight touching water. Then it grew deeper, thoughtful, emotional, full of memories. The maestro listened quietly, his gaze fixed on her hands as they moved with natural grace. The melody spoke of time, of losing and finding oneself, of carrying pain but never letting it harden the heart. When she finished, silence filled the room. The maestro exhaled slowly. "That," he said finally, "is the piece you must play." She looked unsure. "It's personal," she admitted. "I wrote it years ago when my mother was sick. I never meant to share it." "Precisely why you should," he replied gently. "The audience doesn't need perfection, they need truth. That's what your music gives them." For a moment she didn't speak, then she gave a small nod. "All right," she whispered. "I'll play it." The maestro smiled, stood up and straightened his coat. "Good. And remember, don't practice it to perform. Practice it to remember who you are." After he left, she sat quietly for a while, staring at the piano. The melody she had written so long ago was tied to a painful chapter of her life. It reminded her of her mother's final days, of sitting beside the bed, playing softly to ease her pain. She had written that piece through tears, never imagining anyone else would ever hear it. That night she played it again, not to perfect it, but to relive it. Every note carried a piece of her heart. Every pause held emotion she had never spoken aloud. The music filled the small apartment, soft and haunting, flowing like a river of memory. As days turned into weeks, she continued to practice, not out of fear, but with quiet purpose. The charity event grew closer. Posters appeared around town, listing the performers. Her name was included at the bottom, without any title or description, simply guest performer. Many people who had been at the recital recognized the name. Curiosity spread quickly. Some said she must be a former professional pianist returning to the stage. Others claimed she had once been the maestro's student. No one knew the truth, and she didn't bother to explain. Finally, the night of the charity concert arrived. The grand hall was filled with people, families, musicians, donors, and music lovers from all over. The air buzzed with excitement and warmth. Backstage, the woman sat quietly on a small wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap. Around her, other performers prepared nervously, tuning instruments, checking notes, adjusting dresses. She sat apart, calm but thoughtful. The memory of her last public performance and the night she had surprised everyone replayed in her mind. But tonight felt different. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about sharing something real. The maestro appeared beside her, his expression kind and reassuring. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. She looked up at him and smiled gently. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good," he said. "Just remember, play for the ones who can no longer hear, and for those who still need to feel." She nodded, her eyes glistening. The lights dimmed and the host began the evening with warm words about music and compassion. One by one, the performers took the stage. A young violinist, a children's choir, a small trio of students. The audience clapped politely for each. Then came her turn. When the host announced her name, a quiet wave of recognition passed through the audience. Some leaned forward, remembering her from the recital. Others whispered curiously, wondering what she would play this time. She stepped onto the stage slowly, the same calm grace in her movements as before. The hall fell silent. She bowed gently and took her seat at the piano. For a brief moment she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The world around her disappeared. It was just her and the piano again, just as it had always been. She began to play. The melody started softly, almost like a lullaby. Each note carried warmth, sorrow, and love intertwined. The sound grew deeper, richer, as if telling a story only the heart could understand. The audience sat still, unable to look away. Her music spoke of moments lost to time, of care, sacrifice, and silent strength. It wasn't just a performance, it was a confession without words. Her fingers moved with purpose, every touch honest and full of feeling. The maestro, seated in the front row, felt his throat tighten. He knew the story behind this piece now, and hearing it made him realize something profound. that true greatness isn't found in fame or applause but in courage to share one's pain with beauty. As the final notes faded into silence, the entire hall remained motionless. Then, slowly, people began to rise from their seats. Applause erupted, echoing through the grand space. Some even had tears in their eyes. The woman sat still for a moment, her hands resting gently on the piano. Then she stood, bowed deeply, and smiled, not with pride but with peace. The maestro joined her on stage, shaking her hand warmly. "You've given them something they'll never forget," he whispered. She looked at him with gentle eyes. "It wasn't me," she said quietly. "It was the music. It just found its way through me." He smiled softly, understanding completely. That night, when she returned home, the world felt different again. Not because of the applause, but because she had finally let her heart speak openly. Her mother's memory, the years of silence, the pain, the joy, all of it had turned into something beautiful. She sat once more at her old piano, the same one her father had given her, and placed her fingers on the keys. She played softly, into the quiet night, knowing that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't playing to be heard. She was playing to simply feel alive. And in that small apartment, under the soft glow of moonlight, the woman's music flowed once again, pure, honest, and timeless. The night after the charity concert felt different from any other in her life. She sat by the window listening to the distant sounds of the city, cars passing, faint laughter from the street below, a stray dog barking somewhere far away. But underneath all those sounds, there was something new in the air, a quiet peace she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she wasn't questioning her worth or wondering what people thought of her performance. The applause had been kind, yes, but what truly mattered to her was that she had played with honesty. The piece she once wrote in pain had finally become something healing, not just for her but for everyone who heard it. The next morning she woke up to a gentle knock on her door. When she opened it, she found a young girl standing there holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. She couldn't have been more than 12. "Excuse me," the girl said shyly. "Are you the lady who played at the concert last night?" She nodded, surprised. "Yes, that was me," the girl smiled brightly. "My mother was in the audience. She said your music made her cry, but in a good way. I just wanted to thank you." The woman's heart softened. She bent down slightly, accepting the flowers with both hands. "Thank you, dear," she said warmly. "You've made my morning." The girl giggled, then ran back down the street, her laughter echoing softly. As she closed the door, the woman felt her eyes sting with tears. That small moment meant more to her than all the applause in the world. It reminded her that real connection doesn't always come from big stages. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of a child holding wildflowers. Later that day, the maestro called her. His voice was full of warmth and pride. "You've done something special," he told her. "The audience can't stop talking about you. There's even a request for you to perform again at the Academy's next recital." She chuckled softly. "I'm not sure about performing again so soon. I think I've had enough stage lights for a while." The maestro laughed. "You've earned a little rest. But promise me one thing and don't stop playing." "I won't," she said gently. "Music is a part of me now." After the call ended, she sat down at her piano again. But this time, instead of practicing, she just played freely. Her fingers wandered from one melody to another, creating something new without even realizing it. Each note felt lighter, more joyful. In the following weeks, life returned to its quiet rhythm. The same morning walks, the same neighbors greeting her with smiles, the same small market trips. Yet everywhere she went, people seemed to recognize her. Some stopped to compliment her performance, others simply nodded with respect. One afternoon, while she was at the cafe near the park, the manager approached her. "You're the lady from the charity concert, aren't you?" he asked kindly. She nodded modestly. "Yes, I suppose I am," he smiled. "Would you ever consider playing here one evening?" "Nothing formal, just a small gathering. Our customers would love it." She hesitated for a moment. Performing in a cafe was far from her comfort zone, but there was something inviting about the idea. It wasn't about fame or pressure. It was about sharing music in its simplest form. "I'll think about it," she said with a gentle smile. That night she couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe it was time to stop hiding her gift in her small apartment. Maybe music was meant to be shared in all kinds of places, big or small. A week later, she agreed to perform at the cafe. The manager was thrilled and quickly told everyone in the neighborhood. On the evening of the performance, the cafe was packed. Families, students, and even some of her neighbors came to watch. She wore a simple white blouse and a soft gray skirt. Nothing fancy, just comfortable. When she sat down at the small upright piano in the corner, the room grew silent. This time she didn't prepare any famous piece or old composition. She just played what she felt in that moment. The melody was light, like laughter mixed with memories. The people listened quietly, their cups of coffee forgotten. Between songs, she spoke softly to the audience. She told them how music had once been her escape, and how it later became her way of healing. She spoke about fear, about the courage it takes to start again after life has worn you down. Her words were simple, but they carried truth. And the people listened not just with their ears, but with their hearts. After the last song, the room erupted in gentle applause. Some people came up to thank her personally. Others just smiled as they left. But one old man approached her quietly, his eyes full of emotion. "You reminded me of my late wife," he said softly. "She used to play the piano just like that. I haven't heard anything that touched me like this in years." She reached out and placed her hand over his. "Thank you," she said. "That means more to me than you can imagine." When she walked home that night, the streets felt brighter. Not because of lights, but because she carried something inside her. A feeling of purpose, of belonging. For years she had thought her time had passed, that her gift no longer mattered. But now she understood that music wasn't about stages or titles. It was about moments. Real, human moments that connected hearts. Over the next few months, the cafe performances became a small tradition. Once every week, she would play for anyone who cared to listen. People began to bring their families, their friends, even small gifts. Some young musicians asked her for advice, and she always encouraged them gently. Play what you feel. Don't chase perfection, chase meaning. One evening, the maestro himself walked into the cafe, quietly sitting at a corner table. When she saw him, she smiled. After her performance, he approached her. "I see you found your true stage," he said, smiling warmly. She laughed softly. "It's not much, but it feels right." "It's everything," he said seriously. "You've brought music back to where it belongs, among people." She looked around the small room, the smiling faces, the cozy warmth. "Maybe this was where I was meant to be all along." The maestro nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the world overlooks quiet souls because they don't shout for attention. But when they finally speak, or play, the world stops to listen. His words stayed with her long after he left. As time went by, her story spread quietly through the community. She never sought fame, but somehow it found her in gentle ways. A journalist wrote a small article about her journey, "The Woman Who Played Her Heart." It was printed in a local paper, and people who read it felt inspired. Letters began to arrive at her door. Some were from students who had lost hope in their dreams. Others were from older people who had given up their hobbies long ago. They all said the same thing, that her story had given them courage to try again. One letter, however, touched her the most. It was from a young boy who had lost his mother recently. He wrote, "When I heard your music at the cafe, it felt like my mother was talking to me again. Thank you for giving me that feeling." She read the letter several times, tears quietly falling onto the paper. That night she placed it inside the piano's lid, a reminder of why she played. As the months turned into a year, she continued to share her gift, quietly and humbly. She became a symbol of resilience for many, proof that even when life silences you for a while, your voice never truly disappears. It just waits for the right moment to return. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would look back on everything. The ridicule she once faced, the stage where she surprised everyone, the maestro's faith in her, and the faces she'd touched since. All of it felt like a journey she was meant to take. And though she never called herself great, everyone who heard her play knew that greatness didn't need to be loud. It could be gentle, humble, and full of heart, just like her music. One night, as she played softly by the open window, the moonlight fell across the piano keys. The melody she played wasn't written anywhere. It flowed naturally, shaped by her emotions, her gratitude, her peace. Somewhere outside, a passerby stopped, listening quietly. The music drifted through the street, soft, warm, and alive. It was a reminder that beauty often comes from the simplest hearts, and that sometimes the most overlooked souls carry the brightest light. The woman closed her eyes, smiling to herself as she played. She didn't need applause anymore. The world had already heard her, and she in return had finally heard herself. Seasons changed again, and the small town slowly settled into its quiet rhythm. The trees outside her window turned golden, then bare, and then green again. The woman's life had become calm, almost poetic. Mornings filled with music, afternoons spent walking through the park, evenings surrounded by people who had come to love her gentle spirit. The cafe where she played every week had become more than a place for coffee. It had turned into a small community of hearts. Some came to listen to her music. Others came just to feel the warmth of her presence. Children would sometimes sit on the floor near the piano, eyes wide with curiosity, as she played melodies that made them smile. Her music had a way of touching people without saying a single word. It wasn't about fancy notes or complex pieces. It was about emotion, truth, and connection. Even those who didn't understand music could feel it in their hearts. One evening, after she finished playing a soft piece, a man approached her. He looked nervous, holding a small folder under his arm. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I'm from the local conservatory. We've been organizing a special event, a celebration of musicians who've inspired change in our community. The maestro recommended your name." She blinked, surprised. "Me, but I'm not famous," he smiled warmly. "Fame isn't the measure of greatness. You've changed lives here. That's what we want to honor." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm just an ordinary woman who loves the piano," she said quietly. "That's exactly why your story matters," he replied. "Please think about it. The event will be in a few months." He left the invitation with her and thanked her again before leaving. That night she sat at her piano, staring at the paper in her hands. A part of her felt unworthy of any honor. She had never chased recognition. She only wanted to share what she felt. But another part of her, the quiet, braver part, whispered that maybe this was not about awards or applause. Maybe it was about showing others that even the simplest soul can bring light. The next day, she visited the maestro. He was sitting by the window of his music room, surrounded by books and sheet music, as he often was. When she told him about the invitation, his eyes softened. "I was hoping they'd reach out to you," he said with a proud smile. "You've done more for this community than you realize." She shook her head lightly. "I only played a few songs," he chuckled. "No, my dear. You reminded people that music isn't just sound, it's heart. You made them feel again. That's something very few can do." She smiled gently, feeling both humbled and grateful. In the months that followed, preparations for the event began. Posters appeared around town, and her name was listed among respected musicians and teachers. It still felt strange to her seeing her name printed like that. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered the faces she'd touched. The little girl with flowers, the old man who spoke of his late wife, the boy who wrote her a letter about his mother. Those memories gave her courage. When the day of the celebration arrived, the concert hall was filled again. But this time, she wasn't the overlooked woman in the corner. She was the one everyone was waiting to see. The stage lights glowed softly, and the audience murmured with excitement. Backstage, she took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. It was something different, something like awe. The maestro approached her, his eyes full of warmth. "How are you feeling?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Calm," she said. "Different from before. I used to play to prove something. Now I just want to give something," he nodded. That's when music becomes timeless. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage with quiet grace. The applause that greeted her was soft but full of love, the kind that comes from genuine respect. She sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw the journey that had brought her here, the laughter and the tears, the ridicule and the redemption, the silence and the sound. Then she began to play. The piece she chose wasn't one of her famous melodies. It was something new, something she had written over the past few weeks, a song of gratitude. It was gentle, almost like a conversation between her heart and the piano. Every note told a part of her story, the pain of being overlooked, the strength of rising again, and the peace that comes from forgiveness. The audience listened in silence. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The melody rose and fell like the rhythm of life itself. Soft, strong, fragile, beautiful. The woman's fingers moved effortlessly, as though guided by something greater than herself. When the final note lingered in the hall, there was a moment of stillness, as if the world itself had stopped to listen. Then came the applause. Not loud or rushed, but deep, heartfelt, and endless. She stood and bowed slowly, her eyes glistening. Among the crowd, she saw familiar faces, the maestro smiling proudly, the cafe manager clapping joyfully, the little girl who once brought her flowers now sitting with her mother, both wiping tears from their eyes, and for the first time, she felt completely at peace. After the event, many people came to speak with her. Some thanked her for inspiring them. Others asked for guidance. She spoke to each one kindly, her words simple but full of warmth. She never boasted, never spoke of talent, only of heart. That night, when she returned home, the moon hung low outside her window, bathing the piano in silver light. She sat down once more and ran her fingers across the keys. The same soft tune she had played earlier began to flow again, but this time it sounded even more beautiful, as if the world itself was listening through the quiet night. As she played, her thoughts drifted to her parents, her father who had worked so hard to buy her first piano, and her mother whose love had inspired her first song. She whispered softly, "I hope you can hear me." The room felt warm, peaceful, full of invisible love. Over time, her story spread far beyond the town. Videos of her performances began to circulate online, reaching people she had never met. She received letters from other countries, from musicians, teachers, and even strangers who said her music helped them find courage again. Yet she never changed who she was. She still lived simply, still played at the cafe when she could, still greeted everyone with the same gentle smile. Fame didn't touch her heart. It only gave her more ways to share it. One winter evening, the maestro came to visit her once more. His hair had turned whiter and his steps were slower, but his spirit was just as bright. They sat by the piano, drinking tea and reminiscing about old times. "You know," he said, smiling softly, "when I first saw you sitting at that recital years ago, I thought you were just another shy woman in the crowd. But when you played, I realized I was in the presence of something rare, not just talent, but truth." She looked down shyly. "You gave me the courage to show that truth." He shook his head gently. "No, my dear, you already had the courage. You just needed a reason to remember it." They shared a quiet laugh. Then, at his request, she played one more song. The same gentle melody she had once performed at the charity event filled the room again, tender and timeless. When she finished, the maestro sat still, eyes closed, a faint smile on his face. "That," he whispered, "is what music is meant to be." Years later, her legacy remained. People still spoke about the woman who played not for fame, but for the heart. The cafe kept her piano in the corner, polished and ready, with a small note above it that read, "For those who play with feeling, may your music always find someone who needs it." And though she had lived her final years quietly, her melodies continued to echo, in the homes she touched, in the students she inspired, in the hearts she healed. Her music never faded. It lived on, not through recordings or awards, but through the countless souls who had once sat in silence, listening, and remembering how it felt to feel again. Some say that, on calm nights when the wind passes through the cafe's open window, a faint sound of piano can still be heard, and soft, warm, and full of peace. Maybe it's just imagination, or maybe it's her, still playing somewhere beyond time, smiling gently, as her melody flows through the world like a whisper of grace.